beginning of World War III. Big words, and they seem to be on everyone's mind. With global tension as high as they are, especially in the Middle East, it's certainly possible. Ever since October 7th, we have seen the IDF, Palestinian resistance groups, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and other entities in both Syria and Iraq exchange fire. The most recent and most serious escalation came on April 1st when Israel bombed the Iranian embassy in Syria. And after nearly 2 weeks of saber rattling, Iran launched scores of drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles at Israeli military installations in retaliation. This is truly unprecedented. A military strike on an embassy aside, it's the first time Iran has ever struck out at Israeli territory. These events have the whole world holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next. In this video, we are going to discuss what went down, what it means for the region, and what might possibly happen next. In the middle of the night on Saturday, April 13th, hundreds of Iranian-made Shahed 131 and 136 loitering munitions, which is fancy speak for kamikaze drones, were launched from Iran and its proxies towards Israel. These drones triggered Israeli air defenses, including the Iron Dome and Arrow defense systems. Israeli, Jordanian, US, and British fighter jets also helped to intercept missiles by flying over Israeli, Jordanian, and Saudi Arabian airspace, shooting down projectiles before they could enter Israeli territory. American naval assets were also involved. Despite all of this, there were still numerous strikes recorded in Israel. This is because while the air defenses were largely focused on the first wave of drones, Iran launched long-range ballistic and cruise missiles. And while many of these missiles were intercepted, a significant number still got through. It's unclear where exactly the missiles landed, as both Israel and Iran are engaging in disinformation about the results of the strikes. But it's looking more and more likely that many military sites were successfully targeted, with recorded videos and satellite imagery showing damage to the Ramon and Nevatim air bases in the south of Israel. And in the north, Iran managed to successfully strike targets in the Golan Heights. In total, at least 185 kamikaze drones, 36 cruise missiles, and 110 ballistic missiles were fired from Iran and its proxies, with additional reports of 110 surface-to-surface missiles fired from MLRS systems in Lebanon and Syria. That's over 400 projectiles. Now, Israel claims it shot down 99% of them, which seems to be a dubious figure at best. At any rate, while this is a significant attack, it really shouldn't be exaggerated. Taking a step back and taking the time to survey the entire situation, we see that what took place was a measured response on the part of Iran that focused on military targets. And it's possible that this retaliation only took place because Iran spent more than a week attempting to negotiate with the US, offering to forego an attack in exchange for a ceasefire in Gaza. This offer was, of course, ignored. More importantly, this measured response wasn't meant to escalate the conflict into a wider war. The communiques out of Iran before and after the strikes suggest that this strike was more for show than anything else. Let me explain. 3 days prior to the strikes, the Iranian foreign minister informed their neighbors of their intent to do so. This means that Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Kuwait, Qatar, Iraq, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon were all aware when the strike would take place and where the projectiles would fly over. The fact that the skies of the Levant were totally clear during the window of the attack is further evidence of this. And it's safe to assume that Israel, the US, and UK also knew when and where the attack would be coming from. It also explains why the US, the UK, Israel, and Jordan were ready to respond, with fighter jets in the air patrolling the skies before anything had even been launched. So it's clear that Iran indirectly informed the US and Israel in advance, and they did this by informing their neighbors. And Iran could have hit Israel much harder, with much more of its inventory, but they didn't. Okay, but why though? Simple. Iran doesn't want escalation. And it's not because Iran is afraid or disingenuous in their animosity towards Israel. They hate them. Rather, Iran doesn't want escalation for the same reason the US and everyone else except for Israel doesn't want escalation. Because all-out war with Israel would likely mean all-out war with the US, and an all-out war between the US and Iran would be ruinous for everyone involved. This would destroy their entire country. Now, Iran is powerful and would drag the US military and economy down with it, kicking and screaming. But the end result would still be the obliteration of decades of nation building. So their response needed to be enough to project power, demonstrate deterrence, and remind everyone that Iran is capable of standing up for itself. But the response also needed to be measured, limited in the scope of damage it causes, so as to prevent escalation. It's also why they didn't use more projectiles or more significant projectiles. The reason Iran has been willing to take insult after insult, blow after blow from the US and Israel over the years is because they understand two things. They aren't ready for a greater war against nuclear-powered nations with more advanced air power. And their long-term success is all but assured given the current self-destructive course of the US, as it stretches itself thin so long as they can remain patient. Iran's strategy is to build and develop their proxies, increase their power over time, and slowly chip away at the region, as their neighbors either plateau or weaken. And so far it's been working. The near-continuous bombing of allies in Syria and Lebanon, the assassination of high-ranking officials, and the destruction of their equipment are Israeli attempts to goad Iran to respond with escalation. They're a trap, because a greater war would only serve Israel's interests. Israel's been campaigning for decades to have the US invade and destroy Iran and topple their government. And with the war going so poorly in Gaza, Israel is even more desperate to escalate the war and expand it into Syria, Lebanon, and Iran. Now, there are a lot of reasons for why that is, which is a topic for another video. But for now, just understand that Iran knows this. And it knows the only way to win this game at the current stage is to not play at all. And so it is committed to their current strategy of gradually obtaining power through the expansion and development of their proxies in the region. So this attack, while serious, is most likely not the herald of another world war, okay? But even if this is true, then what does Iran gain from their strikes on Israel? Well, for starters, a measure of deterrence. You see, the Shahed drone is an impressive piece of equipment. It's capable and has the ability to destroy tanks. But these drones can only fly at speeds of 120 miles an hour, at a max altitude of 2 miles. However, what makes these drones so impressive is just how inexpensive it is to produce them in such high quantities, costing only around $10,000 per unit. And so, while these can be easy prey for Western fighter jets and air defenses to shoot down, they become a serious threat when there is a swarm of hundreds of them bearing down on a position. This is a key reason in how the Iron Dome was overwhelmed, and when the missiles used to destroy these drones can cost up to millions of dollars apiece, you can see how this can become an extremely deadly and costly situation for whoever is on the receiving end. All in all, Iran is estimated to have expended anywhere between $40 to $70 million in equipment in the attack, while the US-Israel axis used more than $1 billion of munitions in defense. This is aside from the cost of keeping planes in the air the way that they did. And some still made it through anyways. Which brings us to the ballistic missiles Iran used, which are of course much stronger, faster, and higher flying than their drone counterparts. Reports are coming out that Iran mostly used older stockpiles of missiles rather than newer ones. And while these older missiles can be shot down more easily, they can still get the job done if the air defenses are overloaded the way that they were during the attack. All the while, Iran did not have to resort to showing off the capabilities of their more modern missiles, both those known and unknown to the West. It's also important to note the geopolitical and economic dynamics at play. You see, Russia and China have invested in the industrial capacity of Iran. In other words, Iran's ability to produce missiles and drones. Iran's production capacity thus likely eclipses Israel's, and the IDF stockpile is very possibly already stretched thin. And finally, the locations of Israeli air defense batteries were revealed. Now, while some of these batteries can be moved, the disposition and manner of placement of these batteries provides valuable information to Iran. Now, this was entirely a missile war, so it comes down to who has more missiles and drones, and more importantly, who can produce more of them for less money. Israel spent $1 billion for just one night of defense, while Iran spent a fraction of that. The IDF buys their air defense missiles from the West, which is very expensive. Iran's missiles are less sophisticated, but much more numerous and cost-effective. The IDF needs to conserve for their air defenses, especially in the face of growing Irani production capabilities. Now let's talk about the way both sides are presenting this attack. First, Israel and the West. They are bragging about the air defenses shooting down 99% of all incoming incoming projectiles, hoping to calm both the Israeli public and potential buyers of their air defense products. But it's clear that several missiles did get through, hitting military targets all over Israel, which is pretty embarrassing considering that they had 12 days to prepare for the Irani strike. Even with a direct heads up from Iran, fighter jets in the sky on full alert, GPS jamming, and Jordanian assistance, many missiles still got through. It's also abundantly clear that they are losing the economic and production war when it comes to missiles. Since this was strictly a missile war, meaning only missiles and projectiles were exchanged, the victor is determined by who can pump out more of these missiles. With the Ukraine war raging and Taiwan potentially next, it's clear that there is a great need for the US to provide air defense all around the world. But the US has struggled as it is to provide the Ukrainians with what they need, and Israel's demands for more only continue. If Israel did somehow lose an air defense battery, they may be motivated to hit Iranian territory, to destroy launching bases in Iran to equalize the situation preemptively. However, if this exchange between Iran and Israel lasted more than just a few days, Israel would eventually run out of the missiles needed and would spend a tremendous amount of money to continue fighting. Lastly, the Israeli public. Mass hysteria seemed to erupt in Israel. For the first time in a very long time, Israelis were subjected to a fraction of the fear Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank experience on the regular. And though no civilian infrastructure seems to have been targeted or destroyed, the illusion that Israel's immune from any and all consequences of their actions is shattered. How this plays out in the ongoing protests racking the country calling for Netanyahu's ouster remains to be seen. But for now, there is a chance that all of this results in a significant increase in war wariness on the part of the Israeli public. As for Iran, there is hype that these missiles were able to get through and strike targets, but the damages are being exaggerated. The airbase at Novatim did take a hit to the runway, but the infrastructure of the base is largely intact, and repairs to the runway have already been made. Damage to other military infrastructure are also unsubstantiated at best. People are also talking about how Iran learned valuable information about the air defense system, such as how it works and where they're located. But this information isn't really new. Hezbollah and Hamas have triggered the air defenses dozens of times in the last 6 months. Plus, many of these batteries are mobile, so even if Iran learned where they're at, Israel can simply move them to new locations. It would have been a bigger deal if Iran had actually targeted and destroyed an air defense missile battery, but there's no concrete evidence that this happened yet. There is talk about Iran reminding the West of their capabilities and therefore re-establishing deterrence. But this doesn't seem very convincing to me. You see, Iran has been providing the Russians with missiles and drones throughout the Ukraine war, and Hezbollah and the Houthis have been firing Irani-made or Irani-designed missiles and drones. My point is that Israel and the West are already well aware of what Iran is capable of. They know what Iran has and how they might use them to overload the Iron Dome air defense system. Israel was well aware of these capabilities and decided to strike the consulate in Damascus anyway, meaning they risked a war knowing very well what an Irani response could look like. The only real benefits or victories that I think Iran can celebrate is temporarily relieving Gaza of any airstrikes for a day and applying psychological pressure on Israeli citizens. This is significant, but we don't see any evidence that Israeli society is ready for peace. All in all, this strike may very well have been a diplomatic performance that allowed for Iran to respond in a measured way. Israel and the US knew that Iran would respond. Iran let their neighbors know that they would respond. Iran responded with older equipment and landed a few hits. Everyone gets to walk away now feeling like they got their punch in. But the big question now is, what might happen next? Now, it's being reported that the US has made clear to Israel that they do not want to see them respond and escalate any further, nor will they support an Israeli attack on Iran. At least that's what they say. For now, Israel seems to be heeding their request as they debate whether or not they should respond. But if Israel should decide to respond, they will most likely target Irani military, nuclear, and energy sites. Some of these launch sites may have been static, meaning that they can't be moved. So Israel may be interested in targeting these sites in Iran, but we will just have to wait and see. Comment your thoughts below and let me know what you think is going to happen next. As you know, the algorithm is heavily suppressing the reach of this channel, so please support us by making a comment on this video, as engagement goes a very long way. You can also make a contribution to our channel by becoming a member at our Buy Me a Coffee link. Peace.
Trust nothing. No lies.